It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday morning. The sun had barely risen over the quiet suburb when Derek Marshall, dressed in a plain black hoodie and jeans, stepped out of his home for a jog. No uniform, no badge, no entourage. Just a man trying to clear his head before another long week in law enforcement leadership. The neighborhood was mostly silent except for the occasional dog walker or distant lawnmower. But Derek's presence, tall, broad-shouldered, black, seemed to disturb that silence in a way that had become disturbingly familiar. 3 blocks into his run, as he rounded the corner near a small park, he noticed a white SUV creeping along the opposite side of the street. Slowing, watching. It wasn't new to him. The second glances, the assumptions. Still, he kept jogging, focused, breathing steady. But the SUV didn't move on. Instead, it pulled a sharp U-turn and stopped directly in front of him. The driver's side door swung open. 2 officers in full uniform stepped out. "Hey! Hands where we can see them!" one of them barked. Derek froze, surprised by the aggression. "Is there a problem, officers?" They ignored the question. The younger one approached, hand already near his holster. "We got a report of a suspicious individual matching your description. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" "Jogging," Derek replied, still calm. "I live 3 blocks that way." "Got ID?" "I didn't bring it. I'm in workout clothes." The older officer stepped closer. "Step over here, sir." Derek's jaw tightened. He knew how quickly these situations could escalate. Still, he complied, stepping onto the grass. One of the officers began to pat him down roughly without warning. The other reached for his radio. "Possible suspect detained. Matching description. We'll bring him in for questioning." Derek's voice was steady, but his eyes were cold now. "I suggest you confirm who I am before you make a bigger mistake." But they weren't listening. Handcuffs clicked behind his back. The cuffs were tight. They shoved him toward the SUV without reading him his rights, without explanation. Just another black man in a hoodie, apparently. As the door slammed shut behind him, Derek leaned his head back and looked at the ceiling of the cruiser, exhaling slowly. Not in fear, in disappointment. Because in less than 10 minutes, 2 officers under his command had profiled and arrested him, without even recognizing his face. And they were about to learn exactly who they had just put in handcuffs. The ride to the precinct was silent. Derek sat in the back seat of the cruiser, hands still cuffed, knees slightly turned to keep balance as the SUV swerved through quiet streets. The younger officer, the one who had barked orders at him earlier, kept glancing nervously at the rearview mirror. Derek met his eyes once. That was all it took to make the officer look away. They arrived through the back entrance, like they were sneaking in a suspect they weren't quite sure how to handle. Inside, the booking officer looked up from his desk and did a double take. "Wait, is that suspicious person?" "No ID. Matches a call we got from dispatch," the older officer said flatly. The booking officer looked between Derek and the 2 patrolmen, his brow furrowed. "You sure about this?" He was acting strange. "Refused to identify himself," the younger one insisted, a bit too loud, like he was trying to justify the moment for himself as much as for others. Derek said nothing. Not yet. He watched it unfold, the arrogance, the scramble to control a situation they thought they understood. The 2 officers began filling out the intake form, while Derek sat on the metal bench near the wall, the cuffs still tight on his wrists. He stretched his hands slightly, feeling the cold bite into his skin. Then, a door opened at the end of the hallway. Captain Ramirez walked in, clipboard in hand, mid-conversation with someone on her Bluetooth headset. She paused when she saw Derek. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with disbelief. "Chief?" The entire room fell silent. The 2 officers turned to look at her, then back at Derek, confusion crawling slowly across their faces. Ramirez hung up her call. "What the hell is going on?" she snapped. Neither officer responded at first. Then, the younger one stepped forward, hesitant. We detained him. He matched a call we got. We didn't know." "You didn't know?" Ramirez's voice was rising. "You didn't recognize your own chief of police?" Derek finally stood up, calm, collected, still in handcuffs. "I told them," he said, looking directly at the officers. "They didn't listen." Ramirez walked over immediately and unlocked the cuffs herself, her hands shaking with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "This is unbelievable." Derek looked her in the eye. "No, This is exactly what it is, and you know it. The two officers stood frozen in place, mouths half open, like children caught stealing something they didn't even want. Both of you. My office. Now, Ramirez barked. And just like that, the weight of their actions began to settle in. Not because they had arrested a man, but because they had arrested the wrong one. And now, the system they thought they were defending was going to hold them accountable, one painful truth at a time. The chief's office was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, the kind that hangs like a storm waiting to break. Derek sat behind his desk, no longer in the jogger's hoodie, but now dressed in his full uniform. Deep navy, polished badge, the gold oak leaves of his rank gleaming under the ceiling light. He didn't want the uniform, but he knew they needed to see it, to remember. Across from him sat Officers Reed and Connors, both suddenly much smaller than they'd been on the street. Their posture said everything. Eyes down, shoulders tight. No longer in control. Derek didn't speak at first. He let the silence stretch. He wanted them to feel it. Finally, Officer Reed, the younger one, opened his mouth. "Sir, we acted based on the report," the dispatcher said. Derek raised one hand. Reed fell silent. "Stop talking," Derek said. His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. He looked directly at Connors, the older of the two. "You've been on the force, 15 years?" "17, sir. And you didn't recognize your own chief. You didn't think to question your own assumptions." Connors opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Derek turned back to Reed. "And you, how long?" "2 years, sir. You barked at me to put my hands up. You patted me down without cause. You put me in cuffs, put me in the back of a car, and drove me into my own precinct like a criminal. Do you understand what that means?" Reed swallowed hard. "We didn't know." "Exactly," Derek snapped, voice sharp now. "You didn't know. You didn't ask. You didn't stop. You saw a black man in a hoodie jogging through a neighborhood and decided that was enough. You didn't treat me like a citizen. You treated me like a threat." Both officers sat frozen. Derek leaned forward, his voice dropping low. "Now imagine if I wasn't the chief. Imagine if I didn't have a badge waiting in this building. What do you think would have happened next? A resisting charge? An overnight in holding? Would I have made it home at all?" Neither answered. Because they knew. "This isn't just a mistake," Derek continued. "This is a pattern. One you've both stepped into without even seeing the walls around you. And you're lucky, that the man you profiled was someone who can actually do something about it." He stood. "Effective immediately. Both of you are suspended, pending review. Internal Affairs will contact you by the end of the day." Their faces paled. "But sir," Connors tried to protest. "No, you've done enough," Derek said. He opened the door. "Now get out of my office." They stood stiffly, shame radiating off of them like heat. As the door closed behind them, Derek exhaled slowly. His hands trembled slightly, not with anger, with restraint. Because for years, he'd warned about this. About blind policing, about racial bias baked into instincts, about what it felt like to wear a uniform while still being seen as a threat the second it came off. But they never listened. Now they would. Because the silence that had protected them was gone, and the badge they ignored had just become the hammer coming down. News travels fast in a precinct, even when no one speaks it aloud. By midday, whispers had already reached the break room, the locker bays, the dispatch corner. "Did you hear what happened this morning?" No names, no confirmations, just tight glances and half-finished sentences. But everyone knew. The two officers who had strutted through the ranks like they owned the pavement now walked the halls like shadows, suspended, stripped of their authority, their uniforms now a bitter reminder of the judgment they failed to show. Derek kept his day moving. Meetings, reports, a budget call with the mayor's office. From the outside, nothing seemed different, but inside, his mind spun with the weight of what had almost happened. Not just to him, but to so many others whose stories never reached a desk like his. He'd spent a career earning his place in a system that still, even now, saw him as a threat the moment he wasn't in uniform. It wasn't just personal, it was structural. Later that afternoon, Chief Marshal stepped into the briefing room for the department's weekly strategy session. Heads turned as he entered, not out of respect, but out of guilt. The room was more tense than usual. Even the usual banter between detectives had disappeared. He didn't acknowledge it. He walked straight to the podium and tapped the microphone. "I wasn't going to say anything about this morning," he began, "but silence is what creates rot. And I didn't rise through these ranks to be part of that." The room fell still. This morning, I was arrested, profiled, detained without cause by two of our own. I wasn't wearing a badge. I wasn't flashing a title. I was a black man in a hoodie on a sidewalk. And that was enough. A ripple moved through the room. Some lowered their eyes. Others stiffened in their seats. I've spent my career fighting for this department to be better, more accountable, more just. But today proves that for all our talk, we still have work to do. Not just in policy, not just in training, but in instinct. In heart, he scanned the room, making eye contact with every officer willing to meet his gaze. "If it can happen to me," he said, voice steady, "then what's happening to those without this badge? To the kids on the corner? To the men walking home from work? To the women pulled over for no reason other than being out of place in the wrong zip code?" No one answered. Derek leaned into the podium. "This is not just about two officers. It's about a culture that says certain people are threats before they've spoken a word. That stops them, searches them, detains them, and hopes to sort it out later. That ends today. Not with a press release, not with a poster, but with action, with accountability." With truth, he stepped away from the podium, letting the silence carry the weight of what was left unsaid. Then he walked out, not waiting for applause, because this wasn't a moment to be celebrated. It was one to be remembered, and nothing would be the same after it. The media didn't get the story, not officially. There were no press releases, no headlines. But stories like this had a way of escaping through the cracks. By the end of the week, a community blog had posted a vague report about an internal misconduct investigation involving two officers and the chief. It didn't take long for speculation to spread. People asked questions. Not just civilians, but other officers, lieutenants, even retired brass who still had friends inside the building. Derek ignored the noise. He didn't need headlines. He needed change. He spent his evenings reviewing disciplinary procedures, rewriting use of force guidelines, and personally selecting new hires for the Internal Review Board. For the first time in the department's history, he placed two civilians on that board, both women of color from the community. That alone sent shockwaves down the chain. Some resisted, quietly, emails, side comments, a sudden frost in conversations. But Derek didn't flinch, because now every policy had a face, every decision had weight, and every time he walked into a room, they no longer saw just a badge. They saw the man who had been handcuffed by his own. One morning, during a city council roundtable, an older councilman leaned toward him during a coffee break. "I heard about what happened," the man said, keeping his voice low. "That kind of thing, it shouldn't happen." "Not to someone like you," Derek looked at him calmly. "It shouldn't happen to anyone," he replied. The councilman nodded, caught off guard by the response. Later that day, as Derek reviewed a stack of anonymous complaints from the public, he paused on one report. A young black man pulled over without cause, then cited for uncooperative behavior after asking why he was stopped. The officer's name? Reed. The same one who had cuffed Derek. The date? Just 2 weeks before the incident with Derek himself. He stared at the paper for a long moment, then picked up his phone. Internal Affairs. "I'm reopening a complaint. Tag it urgent." Because this wasn't just about justice for him. It was about every moment that almost ended worse. Every voice that was silenced. Every cuff that clicked before a question was even asked. And now that he was watching, they had nowhere left to hide. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it began. Quietly, then with momentum. Officers started showing up differently. The usual roll call jokes about being too woke or watching your back around IA faded into silence. The weight of what happened to Chief Marshal had settled into the bones of the department. Not just because it happened, but because he let it be seen. Derek wasn't chasing revenge. He wasn't interested in destroying careers. What he wanted was deeper, a shift in consciousness, a new standard that didn't need to be written on a wall, but felt in every stop, every call, every moment where a decision was made in a heartbeat. He introduced scenario-based training, but instead of using actors or dummy cases, he used real footage, body cam clips of arrests gone wrong, dash cam footage of unlawful stops, not from other departments, from theirs. Some officers pushed back. One sergeant stormed out of the room during a session. Another filed a complaint, claiming he was being made to feel guilty just for doing his job. Derek let the complaint sit on his desk for a full week before stamping it with one word: acknowledged. No apology. No retreat. Because discomfort was the start of change. At the next training session, a young Latina officer raised her hand after a difficult video played. "What are we supposed to do," she asked, "when we see another officer crossing a line? One with more stripes? One who could make our life hell?" Derek didn't hesitate. "You speak," he said, "because silence is complicity. And if this department punishes you for telling the truth, I'll know, and they'll answer to me." There was a shift in the room, subtle, but real. Later that evening, as he packed up to leave, Derek passed by the wall of honor near the front entrance. Old photos of former chiefs, all white, all in black and white frames. He stopped for a moment, looking at them. Not with resentment, but with resolve. They had built something that served some of the people. Now it was his turn to build something that served all of them. And this time, no one would mistake who held the authority in the room. The sun was setting over the city as Derek Marshall stood on the rooftop of the precinct, looking out at the skyline. Below, the streets pulsed with life. People going home from work, kids playing near corner stores, families heading into restaurants. To most, it was just another evening. But to Derek, it meant something different now. He hadn't just survived the system. He had exposed it. From the inside, the officers who had cuffed him were gone. One resigned quietly. The other was terminated after an internal audit uncovered years of complaints buried under procedural excuses. But Derek never made them scapegoats. They were symptoms of something larger. And now, that larger thing was finally under the knife. The department had changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but undeniably. There were new protocols, new eyes in the room. Community advocates were present at monthly oversight meetings. Officers were expected to explain their stops, not just defend them. Body cam footage was reviewed not only for violations, but for lessons. And the city had taken notice. One morning, a letter arrived at Derek's office. No return address. Inside was a single sentence, handwritten in neat, slanted cursive: "What happened to you has happened to us. Thank you for not walking away." He kept it in the top drawer of his desk. Weeks later, at a public town hall, a young boy stood up during the Q&A. Maybe 10 years old, brown skin, big eyes, nervous hands. He asked, "Are you scared being a police chief when people treat you like you don't belong?" The room went quiet. Derek leaned forward and smiled gently. "Sometimes, but I'm more scared of what happens if I stay quiet." The boy nodded slowly, then sat down. And in that moment, Derek knew this wasn't about a jog gone wrong, or a pair of handcuffs, or even about him. It was about legacy, about being the one who stood up when everyone expected silence, about turning a moment of humiliation into a movement of reckoning. And as he stood on that rooftop, the city stretched before him, alive and watching. He made himself a promise. Never again would power be mistaken for protection, and never again would silence be mistaken for peace.